Hey all, this is our, let's start our review for the concepts test, which is coming up on Thursday. I'm going to review just the concepts on this video. I'm not going to review the terms, because the terms themselves are just really just definitions and how they're used. I'll fill that out maybe on this sheet, and I'll put it up on haiku for you guys. So I'm going to go through unit by unit the concepts. I'm just going to give you a good definition, and we're going to talk about a little bit how it appears and how it plays out in our unit. Hopefully it shouldn't take more than 10 minutes, but it might, because I like to hear my own voice. All right, here we go. Okay, in Unit 2, we have two concepts here. We're going to on the first concept is the concept of grama. Grama, as we know, is what's called damage, an indirect action. Where you act on you cause a result to happen, but not from your own action, but from you doing an action which allows it to happen. There's no force actually caused by you. Obviously, the example we had in our Gemara is where the object was thrown off a roof and it was going to land on a pillow, and the person pulled the pillow. So we'll just say the pulled pillow, and you should remember the person pulled the pillow away and it broke, and the reason why the person is not chayav is because that's considered to be what's called grama. It's an indirect act of damage because you didn't actually you didn't put the force on the object. You just pulled something out of its way. Similarly, actually connected ideas, the idea of ma'aseh hezek. Ma'aseh hezek means an act of damage. You're only chayav to pay for something if you do an act of damage. The definition doesn't matter what you being the cause or not does not matter. It has to do with the definition of your act. So in this case also, since the throw, we'll write throw to the, sorry for the messiness, throw to the pillow. Since the person who threw the object in the second situation was through the object, and when they let go of the object, it was going to land on the pillow. Only afterwards the pillow was moved out of the way. Therefore, that is not considered to be an act of damage, and that's why the person who threw the object was patur, because even though they are the cause, they're the one who threw it, and they're the one who moved the pillow away, neither of those actions are considered to be a real act of damage, which you're only chayav if you do an act of damage. Later on, we're going to see an example of ma'aseh hezek, act of damage, where instead of it making it harder for you to become chayav, in order as leniency, it actually makes it easier for a person to become chayav. So again, grama is the indirect action. The person pulled the pillow away, and therefore they're patur because they didn't act directly on the object. And ma'aseh hezek means an act of damage. You're only chayav if your act is defined as a damaging act. An example that's not a damaging act would be a situation where someone threw an object that was going to land on a pillow and then moved the pillow out of the way. Since their throw, which is the force that damages, was a throw that was going to land on a pillow when the person let go. Therefore, that's not considered to be an act of damage. Therefore, they are patur. Okay, then we move on to Unit 3. These three concepts are not related. We'll just do them one at a time. We're always going to do them one at a time. The first one is called a braita. A braita, again, are statements from Tanaim that did not make it into the Mishnah. Remember, it has to be statements that come from Tanaim, but yet they're not included in the Mishnah. They have the same authority as a Mishnah because it comes from the same time period. It just didn't get included whenever Yehuda Nasi made it. The first, we have many braitas. The braita that we had in our Gemara, which was brought as proof, was the braita of the 10 people with 10 sticks. And again, that braita was used. Actually, no, the truth is, it actually does connect to the second idea, because that case was the analogy. But again, we'll do that in a second. Okay, so again, that's the braita. In our case, the case 10 people and 10 sticks was brought in as an outside case to compare it to our case of the person being thrown off a roof. What's an analogy? An analogy is where, at least the way we discussed it, an analogy when it comes to halacha, or when it comes to legal terms, is when you try to compare two cases. If I know what the ruling is in one case, I know what the psak is in one case, and I find a case that's similar, and then I can make an analogy between the two and say, since I know what the ruling is in this case, in case A, I know what the ruling will be in case B, which is similar. The example in our Gemara actually was the case of the 10 people with the 10 sticks. We had a situation where someone was thrown off the roof and killed before they hit the ground. We did not know what the ruling was directly in that case. Rava came along and said, you know what, I know there's going to be a machloket in that case because there's a machloket in our case as well. Because there's a machloket in a similar case, aka the case of the 10 people with the 10 sticks. So in our Gemara, the off the roof case is an analogy is made between the off-the-roof case and the 10 people and 10 sticks. And again, the same way there was a machloket in this, we knew there'd be a machloket in this, because once you have an analogy, you can say the psak is the same, the ruling is the same. Drasha is where you take a pasuk and you explain it based on the way it's written. You explain that it could teach us something that's not directly written in the pasuk. Ours was the drasha that we discussed was the pasuk of kol nefesh, whether it means all of the soul or any part of the soul. Depending on how you explain that pasuk, that word, that changes the halacha. In our case, to decide whether it means all of the soul or a part of the soul, whether you can be chayav if you're involved in murder with more than one person. Again, drasha is to take a pasuk and explain it to teach us something new. Okay, now we move on to Unit 4. Unit 4, we have two concepts that came up. We already discussed earlier. They come again in Unit 4. That's why I don't have the definitions out here. You're going to have to know how they come up both in Unit 3 and Unit 4. Unit 4 is the Gemara with the coal that's left on a person's chest, or coal that's left on a person's clothing. Masa hezek comes up again. The act of damage comes up when it comes to the coal on the clothing. In that case, now we have a situation of ma'asa hezek, which ends up causing a person to be chayav. In the case of the coal on the clothing case, even though the person who owned the clothing was sitting there allowing the coal to burn his clothing, they easily could have gotten rid of it, and that makes them almost like the main cause. It's irrelevant. The person still has to pay because they did an act of damage. The act of putting a coal on someone's clothing is a damaging act, and it resulted in a payment. And since that's an act of damage which resulted in a destruction of the clothing, the person in that case who put the coal has to pay, even though you could claim that it wasn't really their fault. And again, in that Gemara as well, we have two analogies. The two Mishnayot, remember, Tarvaihu Taninhi, for all those who can't pronounce that phrase, that's all of you. There were two Mishnayot, they both been proven from Mishnayot. Both coal cases were proven from Mishnayot, which had analogies. The two Mishnayot, again, was the underwater one, where the person could escape, where the person had the ability to escape, that's like the coal in the chest, and the rip my clothing, Mishnah, Mishnah, I'm sorry, where you have a situation where the person gave permission, which is and we said that even though they gave permission, you still have to pay because it's an act of damage, a ma'asa hezek. We said the same way we know the ruling is in that case, we'd make the same ruling would be in the clothing on the coal case, because you can make an analogy between the two. So cases are similar, so the rulings are similar. Now we come to units 5 through 7, which I'm not making you review here, but these are all the cases of the rock cases, where the rock rolled off someone's lap, or someone threw a rock and it went farther than they expected. Let's go through a couple of the terms here. This was very important. This is a very important. What's it called? A very important unit when it came to terms, concepts. Let's go through them. Here we go. So the first one is a paradigm. A paradigm is a perfect example of a case which you can then use to make many analogies in terms of halacha. Meaning, I give you a case which may be bizarre, but since I know exactly the reasoning, right, why the halacha is so in this case, I could apply it to many different situations. All the rock cases. So in our Gemara, all the rock cases are meant to be paradigms. They're not meant necessarily to be literally, what happens if a rock's on someone's lap? No one needs to know that. But those serve as examples of specific type of situation. A situation where you had no control. A situation where there was a mistake. And what the halacha would, if you know what the halacha would be in that case, the rock falling off the lap, I forgot I had a rock on my lap, you would know what the halacha is in many similar situations. Just in terms of the actual cases themselves, so we had the first case was the rock was on someone's lap and they didn't know about it at all and it fell off. That was a paradigm for any case of ones, right? It was something that was against your will, which we're going to see that in a minute. Then we had where someone forgot. That was a paradigm for shoge cases. Then we had another one where someone wanted to throw it 2 amot, but it went 4. That's an example of someone who had, what do we say? We said someone had the right intentions, but it was a bad outcome. Meaning they thought what they were doing was fine, but it didn't turn out exactly the way they expected it to. Okay, so now after we went through these 3 cases, the question was, well, what's the halacha of ones, of shogeg, of you wanted to go 2 and went 4 in different areas of halacha. The first area of halacha was what's called nezikin, which is what's called tort law. Tort law is just a fancy way of saying damages. Okay, in units 5 through 7 discuss when someone would be chayav to pay and when someone would not be chayav. Again, we had the phrase adamu ad olam. Then you had arba'ad dvarim, the 4 things that you pay for if you injure somebody. That was the second area of halacha that we discussed when it came to the rock cases. It was I'm not going to write them down. I'm just going to end up being so sloppy and I'm going to run out of space, so I'll just say it. It's embarrassment, it's loss of loss of work, it's pain, and it is medical bills. Those are the four things that you pay for if you injure somebody. And then finally, that was the second area of halacha. The third area of halacha we discussed was another area was accidental murder. I'm sorry, it was Ir Miklat. Ir Miklat is a place, city of refuge that you go to if you kill somebody by accident. Remember, the accident has to be where it was a real, what's called a shogeg, right, where there was a certain amount of, we called it forgetting. Okay, there was knowledge, but you forgot. Only then do you go to Ir Miklat. However, if either it was completely not your fault, it was completely out of your control, that you killed somebody, then you don't even go to Ir Miklat, something that you could not have foreseen, or because you were negligent, even though you didn't do it on purpose. If you were careless, then you also don't go to Ir Miklat, but that's a bad way. You're not protected by Ir Miklat. If it's in the middle where I just forgot about what was going on around me, right? I forgot that my brakes on my car were no good, and they went, and then they killed somebody. That's a situation where you go to Ir Miklat. Again, if you kill somebody by accident. A couple of more random concepts that we have. So we have the concept of what's called ones. Ones is a situation where you have no control. That was the first rock case, right? Where you had a rock on your lap and you never knew that it was there. Okay, you didn't know. Okay, there was a rock on your lap and you just didn't know it was there, and you got up and it rolled off and it did X, Y, and Z. That's a paradigm for ones. Because if something's on your lap and you have no idea that it was ever there and you get up, how is that your fault? It's completely not in your control. The second one, type of action, this was the second rock case. This was the second case. Was a case where you made a mistake. That's what shogeg is. Ones is where you do something that's out of your control. Shogeg is where you make a mistake, usually because you just forgot. You just lost track of what was going on around you. You kind of forgot what was going on around you, right? The case the Gemara brings is, let's say someone had a rock on their lap. They knew about it, but then they forgot and they got up and it rolled off. So because it's a real accident, you're not chayav in a lot of things, but because it's somewhat your fault, because it was in your control, you should have remembered. You also are also you're chayav for some things as opposed to, but since it was a mistake, you're still patur over some things. When it came to Shabbat, we pointed out that you're only chayav if you do malacha in a normal way. It's called malechet machsheva. You're only chayav in a situation that you only are considered to be violating Shabbos D'oraita if you do malacha in a normal way. What's considered to be a normal way? So the action is part one, right? It has to be a normal way of an action of doing something, right? If you turn off a light with your elbow, that's not the normal way of doing it, so that's not malechet machsheva, so you wouldn't be chayav. And second of all, you have to have knowledge of what's going on around you. It's not malechet machsheva if you have no clue what's going on around you. So in a situation where you had a person had a rock on your lap and they got up and they forgot about it and they got up and it fell off, so you at the time that you did it, that's you didn't have knowledge the rock was there. You knew at one point, but you forgot. That's not a normal way of doing something. Normally you do something with intent. Right? Knowledge, I guess you should say knowledge/intent. So in all the cases that we had in the Gemara, you were patur when it came to Shabbos, because they were all cases where you weren't acting in a normal productive way. Okay, then when it came to Unit 8b, so this was the whole Gemara with what happens if you have two words that are used interchangeably, two different ways of thinking about a situation, but most people think one way. So we point that right. That's the word rov. Rov means majority. In general, majority teaches you. We'll say this. It teaches you. So if it teaches you, we can do it this way. So it teaches you what to do. That's what it teaches you, but it does not teach you truth. It's not proof, and it doesn't teach you the facts. So, for example, if somebody wants to marry someone who comes from a family named Schwartz from Woodmere, and every single person from the Schwartz family in Woodmere has a kippah, etc., etc. Oh, that's the bell. You could, and most people from that family are Jewish. They're all Jewish. You can make a fair assumption that the person is Jewish. The example Gemara has: if you find a piece of meat outside a bunch of stores, and 9 out of the 10 stores are kosher stores, you can assume, I guess, unless you have no other signs, that the meat is kosher, unless you know otherwise. It teaches you that you are allowed to then eat that meat. Does that tell you that the meat for sure 100% is from the kosher store? No, it could have been from the non-kosher store, but it still allows you to do that. Because majority tells you what to do, but it doesn't tell you the actual truth. It's not real proof. We have this law called Ein Hochim Mamon Acharov. When it comes to monetary matters, there's no rove. You can't use rove. If someone has money and you're trying to claim they owe you money, you cannot use rove to get that money back, because rove is not. Rove is not proof. Okay, when it comes to monetary matters, to get money from someone, you need real proof. Again, like we said, it does not teach you the truth. Rove tells you, hey, since most people do it this way, you can assume like that. You can act in a certain way because most of the things are like this, but you can't get money from somebody. And that's like in our case, even if most people don't use kad and chavit interchangeably, but some people do, a person still can claim that's what I was thinking. You can't say, no, since most people think like me, I want my money back. Majority is not enough to get money from somebody. Okay, then Unit 9. Unit 9 discusses, that was the Gemara discusses, why would you say in our Gemara, in our Mishnah, that a person who breaks the barrel is patur, they should watch where they're going? So what the Gemara does is, in order to solve this problem, the Gemara makes three possible hukim. What an hukim does, it limits the context of a certain situation. It says, well, the Mishnah gives a general statement. The person is patur for breaking the barrel. There's a problem with that. So in order to solve that, the Gemara says, no. This statement is only talking about where it was in the dark, or only talking about where it was around the corner, or only talking about a situation where the whole area was full of barrels. That limits the context of the Mishnah. It doesn't say that when the Mishnah said you're patur, it doesn't mean all cases, it means in specific cases like this. But it does it in order to solve a problem. We're not just going to look at a Mishnah. If a Mishnah says something in general, we assume that the Mishnah means that in all cases. But if the Mishnah, if there's a problem with that Mishnah, of applying that Mishnah in all cases, then sometimes in order to solve the problem, what you'll do is you will make a new kimton, you'll limit, say, the Mishnah only applies in this case, the Mishnah only applies in that case, which is exactly what our Gemara does in Unit 9. We also had a discussion involving the Reish and the Seifa. That just Reish just means the first half of the statement, the Seifa means the second half of the statement. You remember in our Gemara, we solved the problem by saying that the Reish and the Seifa are all part of one situation. As I'm saying this, don't worry about how it appears in our Gemara. Just know what it means. The Reish is the first part of the statement. The Seifa is the second part of the statement. Okay, Unit 10 was the Gemara that talked about. It started off with that case of two people fighting by a well, and the question was how much should you charge this person? How much should the penalty be? The person who injured the other one, person A injured person B, how much should person A pay for the embarrassment? So that was Rav Chis's question. Rav Nachman told him, hey, one second, why are you accepting, why are you even charging people, penalizing people for embarrassing someone by injuring them? Are you really allowed to collect kanasot, a penalty in Bavel, a fine in Bavel? And what this goes back to is the following question. You need to make sure you know that whole part of it. The idea of rabbinic authority. Smicha is what's called rabbinic authority. It gives you the ability to, what's important is to make new laws. It gives you the ability to legislate and to make new laws, and it's important to know this is only in Eretz Yisrael. Real smicha, again, which you don't have nowadays, it kind of cut off during the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. It was originally from Moshe Rabbeinu, from one student to the next, to the next, to the next. And it gives you the ability to make new laws, legislate new laws, but you can only do it in Eretz Yisrael. And what Rav Yochanan was saying to Rav Chisda, you shouldn't be collecting money for embarrassing someone, because that's actually what's called a kanas, which is the next part here. Kanas, which is a penalty or a fine, is actually it's considered to be almost like a new law. Every single time you make a kanas, it's the way you're figuring it out in your town where you live, right? You're going to say, okay, for embarrassing someone, this is what we think you should pay. For if you injure them this way, and because it's embarrassing in this way, and this is a little bit more embarrassing, so you have to pay $10, and this is a little more embarrassing, you have to pay $20. There's no real rule for that. That's laws that are made up by each beit din. So what Rav Chisda said to Rav Nachman is, you shouldn't be collecting fines, you shouldn't be collecting this kanas, because a kanas can only be brought in Eretz Yisrael where there's real smicha and gives you the ability to make new laws as opposed to in Bavel. Okay, Unit 11 was talking about, can you take the law into your own hands? The Gemara tried to bring a proof from Ben Bagbag's statement against Rav Yehuda, who says you cannot take the law into your own hands. The Gemara brought a statement from Ben Bagbag that implied that you could. The reason why this was a problem for Rav Yehuda, that Ben Bagbag said something that he did not say, why can't Rav Yehuda just say, well, I argue with Ben Bagbag? Ben Bagbag is what's called a Tana. A Tana is a rabbi, comes from the time of the Mishnah, which is a little bit earlier, and more importantly has more authority to their statement. Again, you can prove a Tana wrong, but if the question boils down to, there's two different opinions on the matter. One's from an Amora, again a rabbi from the time of the Gemara, of course, which has less authority than a Mishnah, than a Tana from the time of the Mishnah. So if a we'll call that a contradiction, that if a Tana says something that goes against what Namora said, in our case, Ben Bagbag going against Rav Yehuda, so that's considered to be contradicting the Amora, and that would cause a problem for the Amora. So that's what comes up in our Gemara. So how does Yachid Rabim play into this? Well, this is only a problem if Ben Bagbag's opinion from the times of the Tanaim is the only opinion out there. But if there are other Tanaim who disagree with Ben Bagbag and agree with Rav Yehuda, then Rav Yehuda is obviously fine. So that's what the Gemara tries to solve the problem by saying, well, Yachid Vrab, maybe Ben Bagbag is only a Yachid, and a singular opinion, you follow, if it's a singular opinion versus an opinion held by more than one person, you always follow the Rabbim. So very nice, Ben Bagbag contradicts Rabbi Yehuda, but maybe when Ben Bagbag made a statement, everyone else disagreed with him. Now, you can't just make that up out of nowhere. How does the Gemara even get to that point? So that gets into the concept of what's called halach kestam mishnah, that we always follow an anonymous mishnah. But, right, if a mishnah says, here's the law, right? Adam mu'adalam doesn't say Rabbi Yehuda Omer Adam mu'adalam. If it said Rabbi Yehuda Omer Adam mu'adalam, then you say, well, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Maybe it's not somebody else's. By taking out the name of who said it, that's basically the way of saying everybody agrees. However, if there is a name attached, if there's a name attached to the opinion, then it's possibly, not definitely, possibly only a Yachid. It's only their opinion. It's a singular opinion, but not the opinion of anybody else. So our Gemara says, well, it's very nice that Ben Bagbag goes against Rav Yehuda, a Tana versus an Amor, that should knock Rav Yehuda out. But at the end of the day, it says Ben Bagbag Omer. Ben Bagbag says there is a name attached. Because there is a name attached to his statement, it's possible that it's attached because he's the only one who says that, and Rav Yehuda can sleep soundly because everyone else would disagree. If all the Tanaim would disagree with Ben Bagbag, and therefore it doesn't matter that Ben Bagbag contradicts him. Finally, in Unit 12, we had a situation of Zen Nenev Zel Chaser. That was the concept of what happens if one person gains, right? Zen Nenev, this person gains. Zel Chaser, the other person doesn't lose. That concept is a situation where one person gains, but the person they gain from, the person that they're using, so to speak, to gain money, doesn't lose. So the question is, do you have to pay? Do you not have to pay? I'm not really sure why I'm asking this as a concept. It's not like a general concept, but it comes up just in that Gemara. But okay, just know that. No, if I asked you what Zen Nenev Zel Chaser is, say it's a situation where one person gains, and one person benefits by using somebody else, but that person doesn't lose, and the Gemara has a question about whether you have to pay for that benefit or not. That's it. Good luck. Ask me any questions if you have.